Hey gang, welcome to Ozone Late Night. This is part one of my conversation with Brian Quarfoth, the creator and host over at Hat Hole Home Video. Okay, everybody, welcome to another installment of Ozone Late Night. Joining me for this installment is Brian Quarfoth, who I think I pronounced the name correctly now a second time.
Nailed it.
The nostalgia curator and positivity connoisseur over at youtube.com/hathole-home-video. Brian, welcome to Ozone Late Night. How you doing?
Good. Thank you for having me. It's a long time coming.
I've wanted to have you on for a while because I don't remember how I found your channel. YouTube usually is generally very bad at recommendations for me. I don't know how it is for you, but it generally surfaces a lot of garbage. So it's rare that I get something that's recommended where I go, okay. But you came up in one of those title pools of what's normally, again, just forgettable. You know, I don't care about how Model Ts are, cleaned on the bottom for some reason. I like one type of car. I'm not a car guy, yet I seem to get a lot of car stuff. I'm not really sure why. And then I saw your video. I think it was the first one you did about what's his face? The video game nerd. What's his name?
Yeah, James Rolfe.
Was that one that just got a lot of traction? Maybe that's why it surfaced to me.
That drove a ton of eyeballs, which it's so frustrating when not that I don't appreciate. A lot of people discovered the channel and liked the channel when they found it, but when it's, you put in all this work to do all this content and then you just randomly have an opinion on another YouTuber and you just say like, well, I just got some thoughts I want to think out loud and spend 20 minutes, just kind of talking about a situation, and it's very low effort, and you put it out there, and that's the thing that gets 100,000 views or whatever it is, and it's so hard to not want to do more of that. It's so hard. The algorithm, the way it feeds off of negativity and hot takes, it's so hard to just be like, well, I guess I could just do that every day. Like, that's why my happy-go-lucky movie reviews get 200 views, and I just mildly question the motives of a big YouTuber, and all of a sudden I'm famous. It's like, no wonder it's such a negative place.
Yeah, I really generally almost hate YouTube. I think it has really encouraged in many ways the worst type of stuff from people, because you're right, it rewards, like everything. I mean, I shouldn't pretend it's just YouTube. To be fair, it's unfortunately what was figured out early on by the people running companies where social media of any kind or content creation of any kind, whatever the term is going to be next week, what they figured out quick was, people when they're angry, or like hate watching is a concept that is so foreign to me. I can't understand people who hate watch things.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk about Picard, so we're going to talk about some hate watching, but
yeah, but on my side, I actually like it, so it's okay.
That's true.
But that concept that has become popular, I'm hate watching something. I'm like, why would you spend unless you have figured out the immortality formula somehow? Why would you sit around and waste hours? Watch it. It's baffling to me. I mean, yeah. I've watched things I don't like, but I don't go back to them. That's kind of how I look at things. This was not good, so I will. I don't even similar to what you're doing, and even though it is ironic that that's the video that a lot of people discovered you through. Your channel is largely free of that kind of stuff. And the other thing is, at that time, it was I had stopped watching that as well because I was getting the same feeling. I didn't quite have it nailed down the way you did, and I didn't know all the backstory with the company or whatever. Like, I just felt like the videos had kind of lacked something. So I was like, okay, you know what? Good run. I'm kind of good. I'll find something else. That's fine. Plus, sometimes people just get tired of doing things and they keep doing it. It's better to have better memories. So I'll just check out here.
Yes. Yep.
But I become the same way because I used to do bad movie reviews and that type of stuff, and I stopped a while ago, and I was like, okay, I'm not gonna. I don't want to talk about bad movies.
And I do think that there is something to be said for, because it is a mindset. You can go into, there's the people that just hate Marvel movies and have made their business on hating these actors and actresses or this kind of movie, and they go in saying, okay, what am I going to complain about? What am I going to hate on? And there's that mindset, and then there's the mindset of there are really enjoyable bad movies, and that's a whole different thing. Like, there's hate watching, and then there's enjoying the fact that something is terrible and having fun with it. And I think it's probably because I think because we both watch Red Letter Media, and that's where I think the line blurs, because so much of what they're about is actually having fun with bad movies, and that gets twisted. I think the algorithm isn't smart enough to understand the difference, and it twists that into, well, they hate this movie, they're making fun of this movie, and then it just perpetuates it in that direction. So then that gets lumped in. The people that have a good time watching something they don't like gets lumped in and builds momentum for people who are just hating on stuff.
Yeah, it can be. I think you're right. RLM is in an interesting place. They've really threaded the needle on that, because there are movies that they clearly do not like. I mean, they don't destroy as many movies as they used to, or they don't seem to. Although they did do the what do you call it, the wood chipper thing to Nuki, which was when you can get to a point where you could just buy a wood chipper and shred tapes. Boy, you've made it.
Yes.
But that's where I sort of changed. I don't remember now. It's got to be 7 or 8 years ago, because I'd done normal movie reviews, and there were ones where I said, yeah, this is terrible, that type of thing. And I really just stopped enjoying doing that. And now at this point, my co-host will say that I try to extract something good to say, even about a movie I can't recommend to people.
Yeah.
So even if I don't think it's a movie most people should watch, I sit there and I'm working myself into a knot, trying to say, yeah, but they were. I think what they were trying. I mean, now it's me like projecting.
Yeah.
That there's got to be something good in here. And I think most of the time it is actually true, because most people don't set out to make. I think you can tell when somebody's trying to make a bad movie, and those I almost never enjoy. I don't.
Yeah, no, a bad on purpose movie, like a so bad it's good on purpose movie, I don't know if there is a successful version of that. It has to come from like a pure place.
Yeah, it has to come from obliviousness more than intention. I think when you're trying to make something bad, it's, although I say that, but probably the closest is the series Dark Place. That's very true. That's a rare example, but also it's a very specific type of, it's lampooning a very specific type of like soap opera.
Yeah, I don't even think, it's a different, it's almost, it is so much of a spoof, but it's such a completely dry spoof, to the point where everything is so, every little detail is so intentional that I don't even think you could put that in that category.
Yeah, that's the closest. And they play it completely straight, which is something most of these, we're trying to be bad things, can't manage. You can very quickly pick out that they're trying to be awful. But awful funny, as opposed to Dark Place was straightforward. They played, everything was acted dead serious.
Yes.
And then they just did all the technical glitches and, hard edits and bad cuts and all that stuff. And that's the comedy. It's not the performances. It's the way the structure of the show is put together.
Yeah.
And that's, that's what makes that. But that's the only one I can, out of everything, that's the only one I could come up with where I'm like, okay, if you're going to try to do that, this is the high watermark. That's it. Outside of that, I haven't seen a movie that's done it. I can't think of another series or anything like that. Danger 5, maybe, but I don't even think that was as successful. That creaks and groans here and there, even though I do still like it.
Yeah.
And that's about it. But it is tough to do that in a modern thing, because so much of where the movies I think that you and I enjoy came from is they didn't know what they were going to end up with. And
no.
That's what makes it good.
Yeah, and you with a lot of those movies, it's just that somebody wanted to make the best movie they could make with the money and the resources they had. It probably means they were appealing to low common denominators. They're probably horror movies. They're probably TNA movies. And, the Andy Sedaris movies are great examples of it, where he was just a guy that said, with the resources I have, I want to make the most entertaining movie I have the ability to make. And that means I blow things up and girls take their tops off, and that's what I can do. That's what I have access to. I'm not a great writer. I'm not it creates these incredibly unique, terrible but wonderfully watchable movies that were not. It's not like he set out to make a bad movie. He just set out to make what he could make, because he just wanted to make enough money to make the next couple.
And those movies, the interesting part about, because I have my wife bought me the whole box set, and then I ended up getting a couple of them on Blu-ray, which is insane to think about, but that's what I did. But the thing when I watched, because my favorite out of those movies is Picasso Trigger, Hard Ticket to Hawaii, and Savage Beach. Those three.
Yep. Nope,
and the reason I love those three is because the two main leads, yes, okay, they're half naked, 40% of the movie. Fine. I'm not complaining about that. But
right.
They also seem to be having a really fun time with each other. There's actually something where he accidentally, or not, I don't know, managed to get two leads who are enjoyable to watch in scenes together. They seem to be having a good time.
Mm-hmm.
I actually like them as characters, outside of the fact that they are clearly bouncing around braless the whole movie.
Right.
But beyond that, they're fun movies. And the explosions, I mean, he likes blowing up. He likes RC stuff.
Yep, he does.
He's got that quirk, which I enjoy, because I don't know where it came from, but I like seeing it. It's RC stuff.
It's everything can go through the filter of what do I have access to and what is fun. What can be entertaining on the screen.
Yeah, that's what I think makes them work. So, yeah, I'm in the same, because I do, actually through RLM got me talking to Len Kabaczynski, who I do regular shows with as well. And
nice.
That's his whole thing too. And he's the same way. He doesn't want to complain about movies. We nitpick. When we cover movies, sure, we'll say, okay, well, clearly this is this house is a shack that they built out of cardboard in 20 minutes, and they blew it up.
Yep.
But it's the same thing. It's kind of in the same vein. And I actually find it somewhat hopeful that I see more channels trying to enjoy these lesser movies. I don't even call them bad movies, these lesser movies, because there's still a lot of fun to be had. Yes, of course. And my favorites are the Italian imitations. I love the Italian ripoff films. Those are great.
Yes.
Because, the Shocking Dark is a great example of that. That's a classic. That's one of my favorites, because they tried to cram Aliens and Terminator together, which is certainly inspired, sort of. Doesn't really make a lot of sense, but at the same time, do I like seeing Aliens and Terminator squashed together? Sure, because I like those movies.
Yeah.
So that's a fun one. And it's, doesn't really function, doesn't make a lot of logical sense, but it's a good time. And
that's all it needs to be.
Right. And then I rewatched Toys after your thing, because I realized I hadn't seen Toys in a while. And I remember liking that movie, and it holds up.
Yeah, it's funny because I'd been intending to do a toys review for a while, just because, I look back to growing up, and I look back to things I remember from my childhood, and said, oh god, like I watched toys a ton when oh god, one of my birds is starting to go. Let me
Oh, I
close
don't
the
care.
door
I
super
don't.
quick.
I don't care about that. You can have a bird in the background. You want to close the door, go for it. But people who come here know that I really don't care.
Okay, we'll probably still
That's fine. I don't.
still
It
pick
does
them
not
up,
matter.
but because you can hear them outside when my windows are closed, I can still hear them sometimes. So it's very
Life with
piercing.
birds.
Yeah,
It's
right.
life with birds.
It turns out their calls are supposed to go for miles, and when you put that in an enclosed space, it's quite piercing. But in any case, Toys was a movie that I remember watching a lot, and just sort of being pulled into the world. I think it's a great world building movie, but I remember thinking like it's really imaginative but very flawed. And so I went into my review with like, well, I'll watch it again. It's been probably 20 years since I watched it. And I'm going in with this idea of my angle being a deeply flawed masterpiece, or something like that. And I was watching it again, and I'm like, whatever flaws I perceived when I was a kid or over the years when people talk about these movies and it has a low rating, it has like bad reviews. It got bad reviews at the time. So it's had this reputation of being not very good. And watching it again, I'm like, this movie is just a masterpiece. Like, this movie is so good and so much fun that I completely had to rethink how I was approaching the video, because it's such a good movie. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, I never understood why. Because I've always had. It's. I don't remember what, because I watched it. I mean, it was always on. I remember it was
Yeah.
always on. It was on
Yep.
because a lot of my youth was at my grandmother's house because both my parents worked, and she had all the movie channels. Strangely, because she never watched movies, so I never really. So it must have been for me. I guess she's gone. I can't ask her. But now that I think about it, why the hell did she have all these movie channels? I never saw my grandmother watching movies.
Yeah.
But it was always on, and so I remember always liking it. But then over the years, it did have this reputation of, oh, it's not actually that good. So I never really got it. And plus, as you pointed out, it's not easy to find it. There are avenues to find it. I'm not going to tell you where. I will tell you there are HD versions of it floating around, so you can find it. But it's not readily available, so I kind of just forgot about it, which happens with a lot of movies. And the other thing is, when I was young, and this is probably you too, especially video stores, you would watch 3 to 6 movies a week. Now I'm an adult.
Yeah.
I don't have the time for it. So there's all this stuff I know that when I'll watch something, I'm like, why do I remember this? Oh, I must have watched this. I must have seen this at some point, even though I can't remember 99% of it. This one scene is like triggering a memory in my head. So I must have seen this movie. I have to have seen it.
Yeah.
But that one, when I went back, I'm like, this is a really beautifully made movie. This is just a wonderful movie, even if the story, because certain movies, the visuals, I really don't care if the story is any good. If the visuals are engaging enough, if there's some creativity at play, I really don't care.
Yeah.
But in this case, they basically took the essentially Ender's Game, the idea of war kids, and they put it into this really gonzo environment. I'm like, that's great. This is a very fun movie. Now I hope this movie gets a re-release, because I would like to hear a commentary on it. I'd like to know how this movie was made.
Yeah, no kidding.
Which is, unfortunately, with a lot of the stuff that I like best, there isn't a lot of context to it, because that's the stuff I'm always curious about, is how did they arrive at this? Was this because stuff had to get cut and it worked? Was there a whole bunch? Because this is what I end up fishing for a lot. I'm making a fishing motion as if anybody can see me. I'm literally with my hands up, and it's the Italian thing. I have to do everything with my hands. But I'm always curious with some of these movies whether they end up where they are as a result of intent, or, I mean, even besides the resources. So putting the resources aside, what were they aiming for? Because it was a movie I was watching, and I went, wow, this movie seems to have. Oh, it was a Killer Workout.
Mm.
which is a class. I wrote, this is not an exaggeration, I wrote a finals paper based on Killer Workout and how, with barely doing anything to it, I believe it's actually a feminist film. that if you just moved a couple scenes around and changed one or two things, it's a commentary on how people are judged by their looks, particularly women, and how they all have to be in shape. I'm like, this is actually buried in here. There is a real commentary, or I'm inventing it. I don't know because I can't talk to the filmmakers, but I'm wondering now.
Right.
A movie like that getting me wondering is miraculous, because most people look at that and dismiss it as just a low rent or low effort slasher film, capitalizing on gyms of all things. So I get in that a lot with these movies that are either dismissed or supposedly bad or not really well known. I'm sitting here going, is there more? Because again, I don't think anybody of the movies I watch was ever trying to make a crappy film. Yeah, cash-in films. That's a big thing in the Italian, Philippines movies where they were cashing in. Sure, okay, you know that. But they were still trying something. There were still action set pieces that are actually kind of good for what they are, and the actors who are trying, maybe failing, but they're trying.
Yeah, well, we probably have this much money and this many days, and let's put on as good a show as we can given this incredibly tight set of circumstances.
So where did now, as is my usual way of doing things, I'm going to jump all over the place. Where did the channel come from? Was it just that you wanted to start talking about these movies? So what led to the creation of the channel initially? Like, how did you get to that
point? I've always been a video production kid.
I was going to say, you must have a background or something in this, because some of the stuff you do is just wild. So you must have at least some experience in it.
Yeah, so I did go to college for film and video production, but it really comes from, my friends and I when we were little kids. It'll shock people to find out, but I'm old enough to where we were making home, kid amateur movies on a Super 8mm film camera that we had in the family. That I'm pretty sure my parents were some of the home movies of them when they were teenagers was filmed on. So it was. Video was here, but my family was still kind of holding on to the Super 8 film. But friends, we would make, we got really into Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, and we started making anything we could find in a large quantity. We would make a Attack of the fill in the blank movie. That would usually just be a couple minutes and usually just involved throwing things at our friends and saying they were being attacked by whatever it was. There were these wild cucumbers that would grow around our house. So they were on vines. They were the size of golf balls. And so we would just pluck those out, and it was Attack of the Killer wild cucumbers. And it basically just involved throwing them at people. So I've been making home movies and making movies and watching movies. I grew up next door to a video store. And so I, from 5 years old, was renting movies. And very early on, my parents told the guy that owned the place, he can rent scary movies. It's not that big a deal. So, I was, I don't know, 7, 8, 9, and renting Return of the Living Dead and Critters and all these movies, and sort of just and Hellraiser, all these things that I shouldn't have been watching at the age I was at. But so I was just getting programmed by all this stuff, and it was feeding this the imagination, and I wanted to make movies. And so growing up, and then into high school, I was in video production in high school and ran all that for my high school, and then went to college, and sort of throughout the years, I would have friends that also wanted to make movies, and Adobe Premiere started becoming a thing, and After Effects, and a friend would be like, "Oh, hey, I found this cracked version of After Effects. Like, let's play around with that." So we would start learning how to use that stuff, and so it's just been ever present, but never like the main thing in my life, never my career, never anything like that. But it's always been a passionate hobby, and I feel like you're sort of hitting a point where you've putzed and played with all this stuff for so long, you've sort of accidentally pulled together a lot of skills, and now in the last few years, that's where I've said, okay, like let's take all of these bits and pieces and try to make one big thing out of this like crazy hodgepodge, and that's sort of what the channel has been turning into.
Just to explain to younger viewers, cracked versions of software is back when you could buy things and own them, which is slowly becoming a mythological idea.
Yeah, that doesn't happen anymore. Everything's a subscription now.
Everything's a sub.
Thanks to all of us cracking software back in the day, I think.
I was the same way with mine was Photoshop. It was because I was an art student, visual arts. So yeah, I remember I always had you were always going to the different sites, and at one point there were 4 or 5 different ones where you would get and you had to be careful which one you got because you didn't know if it was going to have a virus on it and all that stuff. But I remember cracked versions of Photoshop because Photoshop was $1,300 or something. I don't remember. It was a lot of money.
No, it was a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and arguably I would tell Adobe, you made your bones on people like us who were using your software. That's why we're locked into it. So, don't whine too much about people pirating your stuff, because I wouldn't be a Creative Cloud subscriber and wincing at it every month, if not for the fact that I couldn't use anything but Photoshop now.
Right.
Because I was on that, I think on version 2 or 3, and I never stopped using it. So once you get into something, because I know people, like Premiere is hated by a lot of people. I use the same. I use Premiere for the minor stuff. I am fine with it. I mean, yeah, I'm sure it's not the best video editor around, but it works fine. It's.
Yeah, no, it works. Gets the job done. And that's the thing is, if it's something you've been using for 10 or 15 years, it's like you're not gonna want to dig into a new interface. Everything that is now intuitive to you and second nature, you go to some other piece of software and you're like, I just want to put a transition on this, and I don't know how. Like I've used other, I've used Sony Vegas over the years, and I've used Filmora. I've used some other things, and it's just like, unless I'm literally just dragging clips onto a timeline, I have no idea how to make what I want to happen except in Premiere. So it's like I'm stuck. You've got me.
Yeah, that's pretty much where I am with Photoshop. It's like I could use something else, but I'll never be as fast with it as I am with this thing because I know where everything is.
Yeah.
And Adobe, for all their faults, has at least been smart enough not to destroy the toolbars. Because if they ever did that, that would be the end. If they started messing with where things were laid out, then they would kill anything they've got. That's their lock-in is. And the fact that all their tools, I'm sorry, we're getting into a technology show now, but I like the fact that all their tools now, because I've been on some of their, like I've done hour-long interviews with them and stuff like, not interviews for the show, but like, feedback things.
Yeah.
And I've over and over and over the years said, integrate your stuff so that you can move from one to the other. And they're finally doing that, which honestly, that is getting so good that now I'm really kind of like, oh man, if they ever really hose their software, what am I going to go to? Because it's getting so easy to move between them now. Because I always just wanted them to. For me, it's Photoshop and Illustrator. Because, and I apologize to visual artists, I hate Illustrator. I hate it. It is one of the worst things I've ever used in my life. But I know it's necessary, and I know enough to work in it. But if I could destroy that and subsume it into Photoshop so that it's actually usable, then I would. Because I don't know who likes clicking on 80,000 vector layers all the time to try to isolate one, but it makes me want to put my head through a wall every 15 minutes.
Yeah. Sorry. No, I mean, because I have the Creative Suite as well, so I not own, but I have monthly access to
I was
Illustrator.
Say, you have lease access to.
Yeah, exactly. They grant me access to Illustrator, but if I have to do anything vector based, I draw it in. There's animation software called Moho. used to be called, well, it was originally called Moho. Then they rebranded it into Anime Studio because I think they thought that would get a certain, group of amateur animators excited. And then it's such a powerful tool. I mean, it really is on the level of it's in the same stratosphere as like a Premiere, After Effects, Photoshop. It's a top tier piece of software. So I think then they said, well, calling it Anime Studios is kind of embarrassing. So we'll go back to calling it Moho. But it's really great animation software, and you can draw. It's all vector-based drawing and animating. So I'll draw, even if it's not something that's going to be animated, I will go draw it in Moho because it's so user-friendly and intuitive, and I'm not going to fight Illustrator to draw something.
Maybe I'll look at that. I don't have to do it often, but normally what I end up doing is throwing things into Illustrator, getting it where I need it to be that only Illustrator can do, and then immediately moving into Photoshop and doing the rest, because it's just, it's almost, I can't even understand how the same company made these two pieces of software because one is so much easier. And I know a lot of graphic designers who say the opposite about Photoshop. They can't understand how I use it. I'm like, because it's so easy to use. And then they say, well, so is Illustrator. And I'm like, no, you're wrong. And it becomes 20 minutes of visual arts nerds arguing back and forth over the fact that they just know how to use a tool, honestly.
Right.
So it's inane, but I will never cease to take a pot shot at Illustrator when I'm around these people because I just want to see them start ripping their hair out. So most of your animations and After Effects, man, I've dipped into After Effects so barely.
Yeah.
That is such an intimidating program. I don't do a lot. I'm not on camera almost ever, so it's fine. Yeah. I don't have to do anything animation wise. All my animation is honestly in Photoshop or in Premiere and Photoshop, which I'm sure some people will hear that and they'll want to rip their teeth out with pliers, but it works.
Yep.
But man, After Effects, I know it's powerful, but it's intimidating.
Yeah, I love. That's where I'm most at home. I'm most comfortable. I'm constantly looking for my next review. I was actually just thinking, I kind of want to just be. My videos I film in front of this spiral background on my wall, and I started thinking, like, just purely for entertainment purposes, I kind of want to be a floating head in front of this spiral, like this sort of weird, it'll just be my head, I'll green screen out my body, and I'm floating around, and I'm like, I could put like energy waves coming out of my neck, and I'm like floating around like an alien. I'm just always looking for, instead of just filming it, it's like, what else can I do to it in After Effects that's purely just for my own entertainment that hopefully will translate to some kind of entertainment for the people watching. But I'm always looking for any reason to jump into After Effects because I always think it's so satisfying when like the pieces all come together.
Oh yeah, when I've managed to cobble together things, it's great. It's just that my native thing is still images. I'm an illustrator. That's what I do. So the motion side of it is just tougher for me. It's just not how my brain really works. So if I can cobble something together and it doesn't, I did a thing for Len's channel when we were doing this Tubi tournament where we were eliminating movies in like a Mortal Kombat style, and I did the opening credits based on Mortal Kombat 2's opening animation.
Yeah,
and it looks like you can tell what it is if you know Mortal Kombat 2, the thing where the clouds are kind of being illuminated and then okay. So if you know that, you'll recognize that's what it is. Now, anybody like you, if you were to see the process that I did to make that work, you would think I was the biggest moron on the planet. It's so strung together. And what I know inherently in my brain is such a bad way to animate it. But once I actually got it to where it worked, I'm like, hey, it works. Yeah. It was like inventing a rocket. It was unbelievable. But I know I didn't do it in any type of efficient way.
Well, but who cares? It's a toy box.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. But in the end, if you can make what you want, like your idea of floating head, I'm like in my brain, I'm like, how would I achieve a floating head? I would have to buy a skin tight green shirt to wear, and then I would film everything sitting still with the green shirt lit, and then I would move it around in the video. Like that's how, because I'm in my head sitting there going, how would I construct that? Because I always think those are interesting. My ambition in my brain is way past what I'll ever actually do. Because again, I don't have any. Nobody needs to look at me. I don't think anybody needs to see my face. I just don't. I have a face for audio. That's where I stick with. So, but the idea of doing something like that does have me immediately starting to think, well, if I was going to try to do a floating head, how would I accomplish that? Oh, yeah, okay, green or blue skin tight shirt, which is a horrific image right from the beginning. But nobody would, assuming I didn't make a mistake, ever see that. And then I would just start moving my head around. The energy waves, that's like an engineering challenge to me. That's fun stuff.
Yeah.
So I get where that comes from because, it's there. The idea of somebody sitting there talking to a camera, you can do it. And I've noticed that you've done this. You've always changed up the background. There's several times you've changed up the backgrounds. There's a lot of visually interesting things around to kind of make it where it's not just a person sitting in their computer chair with their office behind them.
Yeah, it's probably a detriment to the channel, but I get I lose focus on, I'll be very passionate about an idea for a very brief window, and then my focus will shift. And so with us, even with the background, with the lighting, I'll go through these phases of, well, I'm going to fill the background with all the, with all this stuff, with old toys, with movies. And then I'll say, no, like it should be simple. It should be, I'll film 2 videos with this ultra complicated background that I set up. And then I'll say, no, I should get rid of all of that. I'll paint the wall black. I'll paint a big green spiral on the wall, and that'll be the background. It'll be like I'm in this spiral void, like kind of a low budget, like a public access set kind of thing. And so I'm constantly changing, but not through design, just by constant getting excited about some other idea.
I'll tell you, I mean, whether it's detrimental to the channel or not, I'm not a metrics person, so I don't know. You would know the numbers and all that stuff. But for me, I don't mind that because I got the public access thing immediately. Like I figured out that's what that was. I'm like, okay, because I loved public access when I was younger. Now it's dead. Yeah. But that was the best thing was just, late at night you turn it on and some weirdo would just be going crazy and nobody cared. And the cameraman had to be just miserable watching, it's like performance artist type.
If there was a cameraman, that guy was probably alone.
Well, yeah, you're probably, that's even more disturbing is like if the camera panned and went around and you just see an empty studio and there's nobody there and this person is losing their mind for 2 hours in a studio and nobody's paying attention. But that's where some of the neatest stuff, because there's still a lot of that you can find on YouTube. Fortunately, a lot of people have uploaded a lot of these public access things, and it's bonkers. It's the best stuff because there is something really fascinating about people who honestly don't care. They have a platform and they're just, I mean, you have your downside to that. There's also very boring public access where it's 2 people debating, the Magna Carta and whether it was actually written in proper English. Okay, snooze fest. But then you flip over to another one and it's a guy doing handstands while he's covered in axle grease and he's lighting his toes on fire. And he's talking about how it represents, the black experience in America. And it's a white guy with, I don't know what I'm looking at. And I'm like, okay, that's great. This is lunatic fringe stuff.
Yeah.
So the thing where you're now holding the handheld mic. Now, are you filming that on an old camera?
I bounce back and forth. For technical reasons, I went back to a modern camera, but I did pick up a couple old, a Canon GL2 and a Canon XL1, which are prosumer, like early 2000s cameras, which I found out that especially the GL2 is still a very popular camera with skateboarders. A lot of skate videos being made now are still filmed on those old cameras because they're, incredibly durable. They have a very specific look that harkens back to the skate videos of the early 2000s that kids now were raised on those videos and want that look. But I picked up a couple of these cameras for cheap, and I'm like, oh, this will be so much fun. We'll film it on these old cameras. But the capture hardware to get it from that camera into a digital format, that's where I'm running into sort of hardware failure and inconsistencies in the modern stuff that I'm trying to use. It was having audio sync issues. It was dropping like weird frames. It was basically just making the footage unusable. After I did it like 3 times, it just started becoming too frequent to work around. So until I get that figured out, I've gone back to the old camera. But yeah, I got to do a couple with the old cameras, and with one of the microphones I'm using. I just picked stuff up. Like, none of this stuff is like I didn't seek anything out. I just kind of stumble onto stuff. But one microphone I picked up at the thrift store was, upon researching it, was a microphone from the 60s, and a big karaoke microphone in Japan. It's weird, just weird random things you learn, like, especially with audio equipment. There are devoted hardcore people on the internet with some of that stuff. Vintage audio is just like this whole world unto itself. But I really started loving that idea of like, oh, I'm filming on this old camera, using this old microphone that's like from the late 60s or whatever. It's like, that's kind of a part of the fun of the whole package. But then, yeah, you run into weird technical stuff, and nothing, when you're dealing with equipment that's either 50 years old and then stuff that's 25 years old, and then you're trying to make it work with current stuff. It's like, can become more of a headache than it's worth.
Yeah, because obviously you're trying to adapt something created before any of the stuff you're using today, and how the hell does it know how to talk to it?
Right.
But you're right. I'm not an audiophile or anything like that, but I if I'm going to buy something like a set of headphones or something like that, I do a little bit of research. But yeah, you can start going down rabbit holes. And I have a friend who's an audio engineer, and he's a great guy, but it really just told me, okay, this is not the person I have to ask, because then he went into a rant about, because he does movie, like overdubbing and all this stuff. So he's working in a studio that has a panel that looks like the Starship Enterprise.
Right.
So, when he's talking about, because I'm like, well, I'm looking for a good set of headphones. Like, well, I'm like, okay, I don't know what the ohm resistance on them is. I don't know that I'll ever notice that. But
yeah, what's good for a regular person?
Yeah, and ultimately I just realized that I couldn't ask him, and I'm like, oh, okay, great. Well, thanks for that feedback. I'll incorporate that into my research decision. And I'm like, all right, I just need to go to a couple websites and see what a person who doesn't listen to Mozart's fourth movement of whatever in an isolated sound cube at high volume needs, and that's what I did. But I like that. I'm glad there are people like that. It is fascinating because I'll jump down those holes for different things okay, that sounds like a terrible phrase, but I will follow those threads.
I'll jump down those holes.
I'll jump down those holes right away. You know me. But I like following that stuff, because there is weird trivia. I'm a trivia hound. I like that type of stuff. I like the little kernels of why, when you find out that an engineer made this microphone because they were trying to record a particular bird's wings at 4 a.m. in Brussels, and there was a train that always came by, and he had to figure out how to isolate the train away from the bird's wings because it only came on April 10th, 11th, and 12th of the 4th year of the second summer solstice, and he made this microphone, and it's now the industry standard of how you do microphones. Like,
yeah.
Whoa, okay, to drive that back. So I like that stuff, even if I don't necessarily need it for what I'm doing.
Right.
I like that Techmoan channel is great, even though...
Yes, I love Techmoan. I was going to bring them up.
Yeah, I'm not going to ever buy any of that. Actually, I almost did buy something in his review. I'm like, with the tape recorder, one of those... They tried to redo the tape. And that was such a This is my other stupidity, and this is just a stupid me thing. Because I love vintage stuff. and I like vintage design. I like when stuff, even if it's useless to me, is designed well. So I like just having things that I can look at and appreciate the fact that somebody made that thing look like that and work. I always like that. So somebody had done a modern interpretation of the Walkman. I can't remember the company's name, but then he reviewed it and he's like, this thing's tape performance. And I'm like, and not only that, I have like 4 tapes. What would I do with this thing? I put it on a shelf. I'm going to spend $200 on something I'm going to put on a shelf or more. I don't remember what it was.
Yeah.
So, but I like his whole history of why, what he's using to measure it and why tape things and what this can do to the sound. I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. Obviously when I was younger, did I think about the fact that the Walkman was actually a really good tape playback machine? No, I just played tapes on it. So it's interesting to think about and see somebody break down the engineering behind things. So I like that stuff. Again, it's sort of like with movie trivia. I like the idea of, well, how did they get to this point? What did they have to do? So I find that stuff interesting. And actually, we're right at the 45-minute mark. So I think what we'll do is we'll end this part. So we'll make this part 1.
Okay.
And then we'll pick up with a part 2. But this is actually kind of a good spot. And then we will start off, we'll start off the next one with either Picard or something else. But,
okay.
We're looking at that. So I'm going to remind everybody that you can find Brian's work over at youtube.com/HatHoleHomeVideo. And I will have a link to it in the show notes. So don't worry if I have butchered saying that or if I'm slurring the words together, because that's just my inability to speak English with any type of competency. So, yeah, we'll come back for a second part with Brian of Hat Hole Home Video. And I never know how to end these segments, so I'll just say, okay, we'll see you. No, we won't see you. Do it every time. You will hear us on the next segment. Okay, everybody, now I'm going to try to end it. Visit OzoneNightmare.com to subscribe to new episodes or to browse through our back catalog. Follow @Ozone Nightmare on Twitter for the latest episode postings and other show information. If 140 characters just isn't enough, you can always email us, theozonenightmare@gmail.com. If you'd like to support the show, visit our creator page at patreon.com/Ozone Nightmare. Music for Ozone Late Night is provided by Ogre. Visit ogresound.bandcamp.com to listen and purchase his fantastic selection of music.